episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, so after last weekend's, shall we say, rather epic tasting, I thought, well, I'm not going to be able to top that, am I? So I'm not even going to try. No, that doesn't mean that I'm giving up doing episodes of the show. Obviously not. But I thought, as I'm not going to top that, I'm going to go off and do something completely different for this week's episode of the show, and then we'll probably come back to whiskey. So, as you can see from the title page, it's a rum episode, and some of these bottlings that I have in front of me are relatively recent releases, a couple aren't, and I just thought it was a good opportunity to give them a try, and obviously share them with you guys. Well, I guess the thing is that I don't do that many rum episodes of the show, and I do enjoy a good rum. Funnily enough, no comments about that. Thank you very much. Although talking of comments, thank you very much for all your comments on the last couple of videos. I will catch up with them as soon as I possibly can and reply to them. Thanks for all the thumbs up and what have you, and thank you to the thumbs down that I got for the last episode of the show, which is a bit curious, because obviously when you get a thumbs up, that people, whoever clicked on that, obviously really liked the show, and when you get a thumbs down, obviously whoever watched it didn't enjoy the show, and you'd sort of like wonder, well, why didn't they enjoy it? Didn't they actually like what I was presenting? Did they not like what I said? The music, I have no idea. But anyway, I'm not going to sort of stew over it, shall we say. These things happen from time to time. So anyway, today's episode of the show, rum. Now, as you probably well know, the rum industry seems to be sort of full of brands. There's very little rum that's bottled that actually carries the name of the distillery, and here is one of the sort of like the big issues I think that rum faces, and that is opacity, shall we say, and because at the end of the day that you don't know where these come from, you have to dig around, and one prime example is the first two rums that I'm going to be looking at from Matusalem. Now, according to the information that I could find, the company itself was founded in 1872 in Cuba and produced the spirit in Cuba. In 1959, after the Cuban Revolution, they left the country and moved to the States. I'm guessing that they started distilling in the States and set up, a distillery and what have you. And apparently the Cuban government took over the distillery that they'd left, and I'm assuming it's still in production. And but don't know, was that distillery, how did they build it? Was it the same? Unlikely. There was obviously must have been a change in the style. And the apparently there was the family that owned the company. There was infighting, and ended up in court, and it eventually came to somebody called Claudio Alvarez Salazar, who eventually came up on top and now owns the company, or certainly since 1995, and then the brand was relaunched, I believe, in 2002, now being produced in the Dominican Republic. Now again, where in the Dominican Republic? There are, as far as I'm aware, there are only three, well, I mean, I don't know whether they're three distilleries, but there's three companies that produce rum in the Dominican Republic. And according to Difford's Guide, the most likely source of the spirit that's in the bottle is J. Armando Bermudez, foreign words, and I believe that their distillery is called La Sin Rival, and again, you just don't find this information out. Alright, a lot of rum distilleries are not pretty little distilleries like Ecuador or something like that. They're whopping great factories, for want of a better word, and they use the term factory. They have a lot of stills. I mean, you take the Miel Distillery, for example, which produces Diplomatico. You know, at least I think it's 3 pot stills, 4 column stills, a batch kettle still. You know, so these are not pretty little operations. And anyway, so that's a little bit of information about Matusalem. It's interesting that they allegedly, according to their website, pioneered the use of a Solera system, because they were originally a Spanish family, and obviously in Jerez they use a Solera system for maturing their sherries, so they kind of did pretty much the same thing. So anyway, the second couple of whiskies we're going to be looking at, rums we're going to be looking at, is from the Hampton Distillery, from Jamaica, founded in 1753, and these 2 bottlings we'll be looking at today are the first actual physical releases the distillery has made, apparently, although there was a release called Estate Gold in 2012, so allegedly. And again, this is it, you know, although obviously we know that the Hampton Estate is a sugar plantation and there is a distillery on the plantation, there is still an element of opacity and maybe a little bit of disinformation going on here, which, you know, really you don't need, to be honest with you. Anyway, so the distillery apparently uses, you know, long fermentations. It's renowned for producing quite an estery style of spirit, wild fermentation, and I'm guessing the usual slow distillation, pot still distillation only, and so that will be interesting. The last 2 we'll be looking at are obviously Diplomatico from, like I said, the company is called Distilleries Unidas, or United Distillers, and the distillery they operate is La Miel Distillery. Now, I've done episodes, I've done at least 1 episode of the show on Diplomatico before, and the biggest issue with Diplomatico, of course, is the whole sweetening post-distillation thing. A lot of people find that they think they're adulterating the spirit, and the distillery or the company basically turn around and say, well, the Venezuelans like it a bit sweet, and given the fact that it sells particularly well in the UK, it's obvious that UK purchasers enjoy it a bit sweet as well. So it's kind of nice that they stick 2 fingers up to the naysayers and go, oh, well, it's not natural. They're just basically saying, well, bugger you, we'll make our rum how we want to do so. And, well, if it compromised the quality of the rum, and in my opinion it hasn't, then, well, I've not got no issue with it. If you don't like the idea of sweetened rum, then buy a non-sweetened one. It's just basically when, obviously, companies stroke distilleries, shall we say, are believed to use sweetening, but then don't actually come out and say whether they do one way or the other. I think that's probably what annoys more people than basically, at least, you know, Diplomatico say, well, we do. So anyway, that's a little bit of a rundown on the 3 different distilleries we'll be looking at. So I think it's probably time to have a look at the lineup then, shall we? Right, okay, so we're going to kick off with the 2 Methuselah bottlings. The first one we're looking at is the Platino, or the white. This is a 40% bottling. Apparently triple distilled and then Solera aged. You can see that it has a slight hue to it, so I'm guessing that, like the Planas bottling from Diplomatico, they strip out the oak character, and as we well know, when you start mucking around with reverse osmosis and all that kind of stuff, you know, you are potentially damaging your product. But as we've seen with the Diplomatico white, it certainly doesn't seem to have done that any adverse issues whatsoever. So it'll be interesting to see how the Matusalem was like. And the second bottle we'll be looking at, again, bottled at 40%, is their Gran Reserve 15-year-old. Again, Solera matured, so, you know, technically yes, it's a 15-year-old, but obviously there will probably be juice in the barrels that continues to stay there ever since the Solera was first set up. So again, should be kind of interesting, and you know, it's quite a allegedly a popular brand. Like I said, next two we're looking at from the Hampton Estate, and like I said, this is the allegedly, I keep using that word an awful lot today, it kind of covers my ass just in case that what I say is not technically correct. So allegedly their first ever bottlings from the distillery itself, or certainly at least since it was bought by the Hussey family in 2009. So the first one we're looking at is the just called the Hampden Estate Rum. It's bottled at 46%, and like I said, it is pot still. The second bottling we're going to be looking at is the Hampden Estate Overproof. This is bottled at 60%. Now, a lot of people go, ooh, overproof rum, and seem to sort of get all excited about the Ray and Nephew Overproof White, and they go, ooh, gets you pissed quick, doesn't it? And I kind of was like, you know, I have to stop myself rolling my eyes and go, but that's really not the point of it. It's, as we well know, it's to showcase the spirit in its raw state as it comes off the stills. In the case of the Ray and Nephew, it is not just to basically get you hammered quickly, you know. Anyway, and the final two, this is the most recent release in their distillery collection. This is number 3, and it is Holy Pot Still Matured Spirit, distilled from sugarcane honey. Apparently the distillery uses both molasses and sugarcane honey, and in this instance this is just sugarcane honey. It's bottled at 47%. It's aged for at least 6 years in ex-American oak, ex-whiskey casks, and allegedly, what's that word again? This hasn't been sweetened post-distillation. Now, I mean, it would kind of make sense not to if you're basically putting out a range of bottlings that is focusing on the style of the spirit coming off the still. The last thing you want to do is start to sort of add anything to it which is going to diminish from that character. But then, as we know, Diplomatico has a pretty robust style of its own, and but if this has indeed not been sweetened post distillation, then it will be interesting. And the final bottling we'll be looking at is their single vintage. This is the current release. It is from 2004. It's bottled at 43%. Batch number AA936. Again, Holy Pot Still distilled. Aged for at least 12 years in ex-bourbon casks and ex-whiskey casks, so I'm guessing ex-American oak whiskey casks, and then finished for up to 2 years in ex-sherry casks. And the thing about rum and casks is that I've found that obviously rum has such a strong character. It really seems to deal well with sherry casks and doesn't tend to get obliterated. In actual fact, it's probably one of those spirits that actually works really well with sherry casks, because you then get the interplay between the sherry cask dried fruit and you get the obviously rum dried fruit as well. So I always like the vintage bottling, so I think that will be quite interesting to finish with. So let's kick off with a little bit of white rum then, shall we? Right, okay, so here we go with the Matusalem Platino. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end. It's quite raw, quite earthy. There is some obvious oak sweetness, but there's also a sort of struck match sulphur note, which I'm quite surprised about, really, because you would have thought if this has been Solera matured for, well, I don't know how long, but I would guess, I would have thought at least 3, maybe 5 years, possibly. That slight sulphury note would have dissipated, but just makes you wonder how sulphury their new make spirit is, if this has basically still got sulphur after it's been aged in wood. But it's a bit simple, it's straightforward, it's okay. It's just that slight sulphury note is just, for me, just diminishing from the appeal slightly. Anyway, let's see what the palate's like. hot, a bit fiery, a bit raw on the finish, and the palate kicks off with a lot of oak. There's a lot of vanilla, possibly a little bit too much. There's a little bit of a almost confected vanilla sweetness as well. Again, there's that sort of slight sulphur note coming through on the finish, and like I said, it does kind of have a little bit of a rawness. It doesn't quite have, in my personal opinion, the polish of, say, the Diplomatico Planas. It's just a bit ungainly, shall we say. Yeah, it's okay. At the end of the day, I mean, it's like a lot of these spirits. It has its plus points, but it also has its minus points. So there you go. Okay, so let's move on to the Matusalem 15-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Again, quite oak dominated. It's very soft. It's very commercial, if you see what I mean. There's some dried fruits. There's sultana. There's dried orange peel. There's a little bit of earth, but it is very oak centric. Although it's not a huge vanilla monster, you can just feel and smell the kind of oak, and it does make it feel relatively simplistic. And apparently this has won buckets of awards, and I suppose if you like a commercial style of rum, it's not particularly nasally challenging, shall we say. It's on the surface very soft, very smooth, very slightly herbal, but again, it is just sort of what it is, I suppose. And for sort of a spirit that's supposedly 15 years old, I would have just expected a bit more character. Anyway, let's see what the palate's like. It's soft, it's commercial, it's a bit watery, it's a bit lacking in intensity. Again, there's a lot of vanilla sweetness, a little bit of light dried fruits. Certainly doesn't seem to have the weight of a pot still whiskey, pot still rum, sorry. But it then doesn't have the high toned character of, say, a column still rum. But this is the thing, the oak is kind of, to a certain extent, masking all of that, and it is frankly a bit dull. It just lacks something. I mean, I don't even think sort of bottling it at a higher ABV would have particularly done a great deal more for it, because it is just very oaky. It's very sort of, you know, and I'm sure there are a lot of people that would quite enjoy sipping this, because it's not particularly challenging. It's an easy-going rum, and maybe sometimes you just don't want a particularly challenging spirit, you know. But for me, I just don't find any interest in that whatsoever. I mean, the spirit itself is fine. You know, you can't argue with the fact that the quality is okay. It's just, it really just lacks complexity. Okay, so let's move on to the Hampton Estate. Let's see what the nose gives us on this. Well, you can certainly say this doesn't lack complexity. It is pretty funky stuff. There's definitely a very agricole kind of character to it. It's edgy, dried fruit, licorice, tight tannins, almost kind of, yeah, agricole herbal, sort of a little bit of vanilla underneath, quite oily. There's a bit of burnt sugar, just sort of right on the edge. It's a bit, again, I find this a little bit ungainly, and again, for a pot still distilled spirit, it has quite a lightness to it. I don't know what the base material was, but I would hazard a guess that this is probably sugarcane juice, hence that slight agricole kind of character. It certainly doesn't have the voluptuousness that you would normally associate with Jamaican whiskies. But you know, if you like it a little bit edgy, a little bit, you know, way, as they say, it's fine. But again, anyway, let's see what the bar's on. Oh God, that's tannic. That really is tannic and herbal, not very sweet at all, or quite bitter in actual fact on the finish. And this is the biggest issue I have with the palate of this. It does not have the balance of sweetness. Yes, there's a bit of dried fruit. Yes, there's that sort of herbally, agricole kind of character, which I really, really like. And yes, I like the slight funkiness to it. I love the agricole rums. I mean, I've done I think at least a couple of episodes on, oh, the name's just completely escaped me, but Rieras. And I love their rums. Their rums are absolutely gorgeous, but where they have a balancing sweetness to all the agricole, herbal intensity, this doesn't. This has just got a lot of bitterness, and I'm guessing that's obviously oak bitterness, but the spirit is quite oily and got a youthfulness to it. So again, I don't think it's particularly old. It's probably a vatting, I would guess, of various aged spirits, and some of that is just a little bit too woody for my personal taste. So yeah, again, not a bad spirit, quality, can't argue with that. Just I think the blending lets it down, shall we say. Oops. Right, okay, so let's move on to the overproof. So 60%. See what the palate gives us, nose gives us on this end, shall we? Very much like the previous bottling. There's less of the agricole notes. There is a little bit more sweetness, a little bit more dried orange. There's a little bit more sultana. There's a touch of raisin as well. There's again a sort of an edginess to it, but less than the 46%. It's not quite so agricole and herbal. There's a little, at least a little bit more balancing sweetness there. There's a little bit of brown sugar. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think this has got a certainly more interesting nose. Touch of coffee as well. A little bit of citrus as well. A little bit of orange, possibly tangerine-y, sort of that kind of type of citrus. Yeah, I think that's got a better balance to it. Let's see what the palate's like. Quite dry, not as bitter. Certainly feels like it's got more weight to it, more body. Feels more pot still now. The alcohol definitely masks. I'm getting a little bit of the herbal agricole notes kind of coming through on the finish. But it is pretty alcoholic, it has to be said. And there is a little bitterness, but that's more alcohol related bitterness than I think wood bitterness. So we're going to put a little drop of water with it to see what that does to it. I mean, you would have thought it would make it like the previous bottling, but I'm guessing obviously different vattings of spirits. So right, so yes, we are getting more 46% on the nose now. It is more agricole, it's more oilier, it's nuttier. Again, it's slightly, there's that bitterness I can feel creeping in, but it's still retained a little bit more brown sugar sweetness, but it's still pretty funky stuff. And yeah, I like that nose. I think that nose is really appealing. Touch of pepper now, and almost a violet-y note kind of coming through. See what the pass line now. It's softer, there is more sweetness to the palate now. There's still that bitterness right at the very finish, but it's not quite so unbalanced. It's denser. I'm certainly getting more pot still character. Nuttier as well. Still plenty of dried fruits, a little bit of agricole herbal notes kind of coming through. But just infinitely better balanced than the standard bottling. And I guess at the end of the day, that's all down to vatting. It's just, I think that the casks they've obviously used in the 46% bottling have just imparted a little bit too much bitter tannin character, whereas obviously the selection they've used for the higher strength bottling doesn't quite have that sort of tannic bitterness, and I think overall it's a far more enjoyable rum. So yeah, not too bad at all. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Diplomatico Distillery Collection number 3. This is the pot still. Let's see what the nose gives us on this one, shall we? Rich, dark, not hugely sweet. It seems to me that this hasn't been sweetened. It's certainly not got the sweetness of, say, the Reserva Exclusiva. It's got stunning complexity. I'm getting moist fruit cake, raisins, sultanas, a little bit of, not quite, it's sort of kind of herbal, peony, sort of violet, sort of, it's a bit of an odd one. I'm trying to sort of narrow that down. Touch of citrus, a little bit of brown sugar. It's got kind of an almost kind of burnt biscuit, Weetabixy kind of note. I mean, I wonder whether this particular pot still that they've used, or whether it's one or more, I don't know, is kind of direct fired. I probably should have looked that one up, but it's only just kind of occurred to me now that certainly with direct fired pot stills you get hot spots and bits where the sort of like the wort gets kind of like a little singed, should we say, and it's certainly got that kind of note kind of coming through. I mean I guess if you were not particularly, what I'm trying to say is that if you didn't know about that, you probably might actually miss it, but that's just an intriguing part to it. And this is a bloody good nose. This is absolutely gorgeous, and like I said, it feels a lot purer, a lot less adulterated, shall we say, as the purists might say. But yeah, that's lovely. Slightly nutty now as well. Touch of vanilla. Damn. I think the whole distillery collection that they've released have just been absolutely superb, and just a real interesting insight into the role that the still plays when distilling rum. Yeah, touch of pepper as well. That's just an absolutely gorgeous nose. Let's see what the pale's like. Wonderfully smooth, a little sweeter. Wonder whether they actually have added a bit of sugar, possibly. Certainly got that pot still weight to it. Lots of dark dried fruits, raisins, sultana, touch of oak. Again, excuse me, really well balanced. A little bit of spice, pepper, maybe not quite so floral on the palate. It's weightier on the palate. It's got more of that pot still weight and character. But it has a slight lightness as well, which kind of like sort of think, well, maybe it's not molasses, and obviously sugarcane honey being slightly lighter. But I don't. It's the funny thing is that the Rums which is distilled with sugarcane honey, is kind of has that slight agricole note that runs through it, and I've often recommended that bottling to customers that sort of maybe want to sort of get into the agricoles, and I'd sort of say, well, look, try this one. It's kind of sort of almost a stepping stone. I don't get any of that slight agricole note on here whatsoever. Yes, there's a slight herbalness, and there's a little drying tannin, but again the tannins are quite sort of soft, they're quite smooth, they're slightly chocolatey, and it's just got a lovely mouth-filling finish. I mean, that is a stunning bottle of rum. Really very, very good. What more can you say? Right, okay, so on to the vintage, and as you can see, really, really dark. And I mean, if you compare it to the pot still, that's got obviously a darkness to it, but certainly nowhere near as dark as the vintage. So that kind of gives the game away slightly. But anyway, like I said, I like the fact that the distillery are completely transparent about the whole sugar or sweetening thing. So, but my God, that's a stunning nose. I mean, yes, there's a sweetness. There's burnt coffee, chocolate, cocoa, leafy herbs, more coffee, dark brown sugar, dried fruit, raisins, sultana. Oh, it certainly feels more denser and more coffee than the previous release, and that's only because I looked at my notes rather than sort of going, yes, I can remember the 2002, honest governor. Again, there's that slight sort of shredded wheaty kind of note, and I'm guessing again, being 100% pot still, maybe they're direct fired. I don't honestly know. I'd be surprised if they were, actually, because I mean, you would have thought that sort of using direct fire is probably not as quite commercially viable. But I mean, I know some distilleries now, certainly the newer distilleries that are sort of cropping up, have kind of opted for direct fired stills because of the sort of the character that they add to the spirit. But I mean, that's really luscious, loads of creamy vanilla, but not too much oak. It's all really nicely balanced, and like I said, really coffee, touch of wood smoke. Damn, bloody good nose. See what the palate's like. Rich, coffeed, intense. It's got a hint of molasses. There's also a little bit of cane sugar kind of coming through as well. Raisins, sultana, juicy dates, fig. Again, it's got quite a sweetness, but it's balanced. There is that sort of thread of citrus that kind of runs through it. Again, you know, it is relatively sweet and rich, but it's not cloyingly sweet, and that is the lovely thing about Diplomatico. It has that richness, but it has that balance to it, and that is the key, I think. Even if they, I'm guessing pretty much certain that they sweeten this post distillation, because it has such an overt sweetness, but it hasn't compromised the quality of the spirit, in my personal opinion. And the coffee notes are just, lovely. I mean, I love sort of, real coffee. And they have that sort of distinctly almost French coffee kind of character. It's not Swedish coffee. It's got that sort of dark roasted slight bitterness, but again the sweetness kind of balances up that. It is just really harmonious. It is wonderful rum. It is full. It's complex. It's relatively expensive, but oh my god, that's just so worth it. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show up. First off, I would just like to say a big thank you to Indie Brands for the 2 samples from Matusalem, and to Speciality Drinks for the Hampden Estate and the Diplomatico. It's always nice to get the samples. I mean, sometimes I get the samples, because obviously the companies want me to buy their stuff. Sometimes it's purely just to do the reviews, but obviously in this case it was to buy their stuff. But I'm afraid I'm gonna give the Matusalem a big thumbs down. It's not floating my boat at all. The Platino was okay, but why has it still got that sulphury note? I just can't figure that one out. It's been in a bloody Solera. You've stripped out the colouring. It should be soft and but it isn't. It's just and the Solera. I mean, I know that Indie Brands, and I know, sorry Sarah, at least I'm not reviewing the Cargo Cult bottlings. In joke there, I think. It's just very commercial. It's easy going. It's kind of for if you're sort of into your rums, it just has not got the complexity to sustain any great interest in. Well, anyway, the Hampton Estate, as I explained, I think that the vatting of casks they used for this was, should we say, could have been, and I'm probably going to get shot for this one, and I'm probably going. I don't know who the blender is for Hampden Estate, but they'll probably be saying, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about." But I really think the cask selection has kind of really hampered that particular bottling. The Overproof bottling was considerably more interesting, in my opinion. A lot more balanced. The sweetness, bitterness, if you're going to have a sort of a bitter tannin kind of character in any spirit, you really need some balancing sweetness to it, and the Overproof certainly had it. 46% bottling didn't. The Diplomatico, oh, bloody hell, I can't speak now. The Diplomatico number 3 pot still was just absolutely stunning. Really great whiskey, and great rum. And if you haven't explored the Distillery collection, the other 2 are obviously still widely available and really, really intriguing, and certainly worth having a look at. And the vintage, I mean, just again, real quality product. And I think the thing is with Diplomatico, with the Distillery Unidas, or whatever you want to call them, the quality is there right from sort of like the white through to the Ambassador, the ridiculously expensive, in a nice kind of polished box kind of bottling. It's just there. I mean, you just cannot argue with the quality of the rum that they are producing. So yeah, it's understandable why that's one of the sort of the most popular. Certainly with my customers anyway, it's certainly one of the most popular rums that we do. And yeah. Anyway, so that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you sort of, if any of these rums have kind of piqued your curiosity, you'll give them a try. So all that's left to say is good afternoon and good gramming.